Any functional society requires rules and the power to enforce them. But the moment you grant a state enough authority to maintain order, you give it the tools to oppress its citizens. Solving this paradox is the central problem of liberal governance. In the late 17th century, this was a lethal, practical problem. England was tearing itself apart over the limits of royal power, culminating in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, where an English king was overthrown and replaced by an invading prince. Writing from exile, the philosopher John Locke watched this political upheaval unfold. He needed a framework to prove that violently overthrowing a monarch could be a legally and morally coherent act. His masterpiece, The Two Treatises of Government, serves as a rigorous engineering schematic for modern constitutionalism. Locke approaches the state through individualized functionalism. He argues that a government possesses no inherent divine right to exist. It is simply an artificial technology invented by individuals for the specific purpose of protecting their pre-existing rights. To see exactly how Locke legally justifies a violent revolution, we have to strip away the historical context of 1688 and build his model of the state from the absolute ground up. Locke begins his first treatise by clearing the site. He completely rejects patriarchalism, the prevailing idea that God granted political dominion to Adam, and that monarchs inherit this natural authority over men. Instead, Locke establishes absolute human equality. He defines this equality by our shared capacity for abstract reason, which allows us to recognize and interpret moral obligations. We can model this ontological bedrock. Imagine a space populated entirely by identical individuals, possessing the exact same rational faculties. Created by a higher power to last during that maker's pleasure, they are bound by natural law, which dictates no one may arbitrarily destroy or harm another. If everyone is perfectly equal, and everyone is bound by the exact same moral constraints, then no single individual inherently holds jurisdiction or political authority over anyone else. Absolute equality is the default state of humanity. Any legitimate political hierarchy, therefore, must be artificially and voluntarily constructed through explicit consent. Before humanity can construct a state, individuals must survive. Locke posits that the earth is initially a common heritage, provided for mankind's benefit. This diagram shows how we divide that commons. An individual owns their own body, and by extension, the labor of their body. When they mix their physical labor with a raw natural resource, they establish exclusive ownership over it. Notice that this happens without permission. Property rights are established unilaterally. They do not depend on positive law, social convention, or the existence of a state. Locke places strict natural limits on this accumulation. The first is the spoilage proviso. You cannot appropriate more food or land than you can effectively use before it rots or goes to waste. The second is that you must leave enough and as good for others. One person's accumulation of resources cannot result in the total deprivation of the rest of humanity. Eventually, humans invent money, a durable asset that doesn't spoil. This allows individuals to bypass the spoilage limitation, paving the way for complex economies and unequal wealth distribution. The sequence of events is what matters here. Property rights are a product of natural law that completely precede the state. A legitimate government can never be the author of property. It can only act as its protector. A society where people manage their own property and follow natural law is what Locke calls the state of nature. He views it as a condition of relative peace, goodwill, and mutual assistance, governed by inward morality. This directly contrasts with the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who viewed the state of nature as a brutal war of all against all, driven by egoism, which could only be solved by total surrender to an absolute sovereign. Looking at our model, Locke's nature is much more optimistic, but it harbors a fatal epistemological flaw. Inevitably, two individuals will dispute the boundaries of a property claim. Without a recognized state, individuals are entirely responsible for enforcing natural law and punishing offenders themselves. Humans are inherently biased. When forced to act as judges in their own cases, passion and revenge take over. Punishments become disproportionate to the crime. The lack of an impartial umpire means that property rights, while morally valid, are highly insecure in practice. The structural need for a state arises from this escalating instability of subjective justice. To solve this instability, humanity engineers the Lockean social contract, which uniquely occurs in two distinct stages. In stage 1, individuals unanimously pool their natural executive powers, committing to uphold each other's rights, forming a unified civil society. In stage 2, this civil society agrees by majority vote to set up legislative institutions, delegating their power to a government to act as an objective umpire. Unlike submitting to an absolute monarch, the citizens surrender only their right to independently execute the law and punish offenders. They strictly retain their fundamental natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Citizens opt into this system through express consent or even tacit consent, meaning that simply enjoying the protection of the state's highways implies your agreement to follow its laws. This two-stage architecture yields a limited government. The state acts as a hired referee, structurally and permanently subordinate to the society that created it. Locke defines the resulting state as a fiduciary power, a trust, bound to act strictly within the terms of its constitution for the public good. But executive officials are fallible humans. They can easily exploit their authority for selfish purposes. Look at what happens to the model when the legislature attempts to confiscate property, or the executive enforces arbitrary decrees outside the bounds of natural law. By violating property rights and acting arbitrarily, the government breaches the exact terms of the trust it was hired to execute. This breach legally dissolves the government's authority. The state effectively places itself in a state of war against its own citizens. An oppressive state forfeits its legitimacy the moment it breaches that foundational contract, becoming a hostile force that has violated its reason for existing. This leads to Locke's final radical deduction, the appeal to heaven. Because the government has gone rogue, there is no earthly judge left to arbitrate between the people and the state. In our diagram, this returns the citizens directly to their natural law rights. They possess the moral and legal justification to resist and violently overthrow the tyrant. Here is the exact utility of Locke's two-stage contract. Destroying the government does not destroy society itself. The civil society ring remains intact. Society can simply convene to appoint a new, accountable umpire, bypassing a descent into total anarchy. This deductive sequence provided the legal justification for the Glorious Revolution and established the structural framework for modern liberal republics. Locke's legacy is the realization that the state is a disposable machine, and ultimate power always remains with the people, ready to be reclaimed.